Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be part 35, chapter 22, entitled Light. It was dark, and Izuku was not alone. He felt so much. He couldn't see anything, but he felt everything. It felt like his body was slowly being torn apart, piece by painful piece, his flesh being cleaved from his bones, and then the bones themselves being broken down into slivers, leaving nothing but his mind. And then that too was being melted down and broken, like it was a mess of pliable matter. Hands seemed to rip at his mind's eye, tormenting it. And then there was light, and Izuku had a body again, and he could see as he fell. But he wished that he couldn't. It was still dark when Izuku hit something hard, but there was enough light to illuminate the rotting corpse of his father just barely. Hisashi Midoriya was climbing out of the ground, maggots tumbling from a decaying maw as he tried to stand on withered legs that quickly gave out, dropping him to his broken arms, the bones of his splintered elbows digging into the pitch-black ground. Izuku fell backward onto his butt, his shaking legs unable to hold him as the putrefied body of his father began crawling toward him. Body giving off slimy gurgles and sharp cracks as flesh sloughed off deteriorating bones, and festering pustules burst along his face. Izuku screamed bloody murder, scrambling backward, fire spurting from his father's mouth as if he wasn't literally degenerating right in front of Izuku's eyes. He couldn't move fast enough. Something was holding him in place. Fear. And Izuku felt like he was dying. Breath non-existent, and heartbeat a broken tempo against his ribs. His father drew closer, a high-pitched keen escaping his flaming esophagus as he picked up speed. Bones clacking sickeningly, and muscles peeling back, leaving behind piles of carrion. He suddenly lurched forward, skeletal fingers closing around Izuku's ankle, digging in. Izuku shrieked, kicking out, One for All activated. His bare foot sank through flames into his father's decomposing face, his toes sinking into the wet orb of his left eyeball. Izuku felt it pop like a spoiled grape, and he screamed again, hot tears flowing down his cheeks. His father used Izuku's leg to pull himself up, flames blasting Izuku in the face while he howled in pain and fear, his body jerking and fighting. Izuku's father drew closer, and maggots dropped from his rotting body onto Izuku, collecting in the divot of his collarbone and tumbling off his neck. He could feel them wriggling, eating away at his flesh. He was being held down, his father's sharp bones digging into weak flesh, puncturing it like a thumb into an orange. Izuku lashed his arm out, trying to... Izuku! Izuku rocked into consciousness, full out screeching. He was dying. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. He was being held down, and his vision was a blinding assortment of bright colors and distorted shapes. He couldn't see. He couldn't fucking breathe. Limbs spasmed in every direction, and someone yelled before he was grabbed and forced down. Someone grabbed his ankle, and Izuku went berserk. His screaming reached a fever pitch, his body rising upward, and his head slamming back against something hard. Izuku, it's all right. Izuku kicked his legs frantically, fighting with everything he had. Izuku, answer me. You need to answer me, please. That was a familiar voice. A friend. It wasn't his father. Shin. A veil fell over Izuku's mind, and he surrendered willingly into merciful silence. Shota and Hisashi were grading papers on their bed at almost 2 a.m, sharing a large glass of wine between them. They'd been sipping at it for the hour and a half that they'd been sitting there, so they weren't even tipsy, just drinking it for the sake of it, always remaining sober in case of an emergency. An emergency, such as the unfortunately familiar sound of Izuku screaming as if dying. echoing through the Heights Alliance halls. Both Hisashi and Shota leapt out of bed, blankets tumbling, papers flying. Shota grabbed his capture scarf, moving toward the door of their room in bounding strides, and then to the front door. Once outside, they saw Yagi throwing open his own door, his face marred with concern. "It's fine. Get back. We've got it." Shota growled at the man. Hisashi was checking his phone as they ran, checking security, looking for signs of a villain attack, just in case. But Shota figured he knew what it was, and Yagi would only get in the way. Izuku was their charge, and they could deal with this. The screaming got louder the closer they got until they turned the corner to see almost every door in the hallway open, and more students gathering around Izuku's room. "Get back!" Shota snarled angrily. The students flinched, and Shota momentarily regretted being so harsh. But then Izuku screamed again, and the hair rose along his arms. Shota had only heard such sounds from the dying. The students listened, and Shota pushed into Izuku's room. It was a wreck. His nook looked like it had exploded outward, blankets everywhere. There were dents in the walls, and it was raining inside, liquid pooling into the wood of the flooring. Shinso and Todoroki were inside, trying desperately to calm Izuku, green lightning crackling over his skin as he clawed at his own chest. They were grabbing his arms, trying to make him stop, but his legs were kicking out with superpowered kicks, and the students were in danger themselves. "Get back," Shota told them, falling to his knees next to his kid. Hisashi dropped on Izuku's other side, Chartreuse eyes wide and scared. "Shinso, try to use your quirk on him. Zashi, help me make him stop hurting himself. Todoroki, keep back." Shinso proceeded to do as asked, as Shota grabbed Izuku's wrists, his hair lifting as he tried to cancel both quirks. Izuku was too strong, even without One for All, and with it, it was so much worse. He ripped out of their grasp time and again, screaming like he was being murdered. His eyes were open, but they were unseeing, pupils blown out to fill the green. He was barely breathing, and what air he was getting was only fueling his tortured shrieks while Shinso desperately tried to get him to reply to him in the background. Hisashi grabbed Izuku's ankles, and that was a mistake. His screaming grew even louder, and he lashed out more violently, Hisashi failing at controlling him. Izuku slammed his head back hard enough to crack the floorboards beneath him, and Shota grunted, reaching forward to shove a pillow beneath the boy's head. And then Shinso must have said something that got through to the green-haired boy because Izuku spoke, stuttering over Shinso's name with a raw voice. And then everything stopped, Izuku's eyes dilating and going hazy as his body ragdolled against the floor, One for All fading from view, the smell of ozone lingering in the humid air. Hisashi fell back against the wall. "Fuck," he choked out, blinking rapidly. Usually not one to curse, it was always a shock when he did, meaning he was truly flustered. Shinso looked up at Shota, the corners of the kid's eyes wrinkled with strain. "Is he fighting it?" Shota asked the purple-haired kid, looking back toward Izuku. Shinso shook his head. "No," he answered. Izuku's breathing was steadily returning to normal, and he was lax against the mess that was his nook, his eyes looking up at nothing as he waited on a command from Shinso. Shota pinched the bridge of his nose, grimacing. After a moment to recover, Hisashi rubbing his back, Shota leaned forward and pushed his arms beneath his ward's legs and back, lifting him up against his chest. He grunted at the weight. Izuku's muscle mass had grown since he'd returned from Kamino, which he was glad for. "Hold your control of him for a bit," Shota told Shinso, knowing it would still work just fine from the distance to their rooms. Glancing over, he saw Hisashi speaking to Shota, reassuring him that they'd take care of Izuku and everything would be okay, before grabbing Izuku's cell phone and following Shota. Carrying Izuku, Shota left the room, making sure not to bump Izuku's head against the door jamb. Some of the students were still waiting outside, but Ida had managed to clear away most of them, so that was good. Back to bed. Izuku is fine, Shota told the students that still remained with a sigh. He was too tired for this. Hisashi rejoined Shota, wrapping an arm around his waist as he walked, not caring about the students that saw them. Wink was cradled in his other arm. The poor cat was wet from the rain and irritated, though obviously concerned for Izuku with the way she kept glancing at him. Yagi was still waiting in his own doorway when they approached, Izuku limp in Shota's arms. "The little listener is all right. It was a bad nightmare, but we've got him," Hisashi told the man. Yagi looked over at Izuku's blank expression and at the scratches lining his neck, looking like he wanted to say something. He didn't, though, only nodding at the two of them with a heavy sigh before stepping back into his rooms and closing the door. Hisashi opened their own door for Shota to carry Izuku through, and he set his much smaller form on the couch. Zashi grabbed some ice and wrapped it in a dish towel, bringing it to Shota to set under Izuku's head, where he'd felt a bump forming from when he'd slammed his head against the floor. "I'm messaging Shinso to tell him to remove his hold on the little listener," Hisashi said, pulling out his phone. Shota nodded, grimacing as he sat down next to Izuku, laying a hand against his arm, hoping it would calm him when he came back to himself. Hisashi crouched by Shota's knees, nodding to him. It only took a second after that. Izuku gasped, his eyes clearing before meeting Shota's, and then filling with tears. He seemed to choke on his sobs before Shota pulled him up and against him, wrapping his arms around his small torso. Izuku sobbed heavily, Hisashi climbing onto the couch to add his arms to the mess, trying to soothe him. Izuku cried for too long, shoved against Shota's chest, and he had to keep his ward from falling into a panic attack several times until finally, exhaustion won out, and he collapsed backward against Hisashi, face red and blotchy and his eyes swollen. "Izuku," Shota whispered. "Are you going to be all right?" Izuku's breath hitched, and he didn't answer for a moment. "Do you want to talk about it?" Hisashi smoothed Izuku's damp hair away from his face. They were all in various stages of drying from Izuku's rain. Izuku rapidly shook his head, but didn't answer vocally. Shota assumed this meant he was nonverbal for the time being, and was suddenly grateful that Hisashi had grabbed the boy's phone. Izuku didn't use it, though. Instead, curling into a ball, on the couch between Shota and Hisashi, his face shoved into Hisashi's leg. Chartreuse eyes met his own, and Shota sighed. It looked like neither of them would be getting any sleep that night. The morning dragged on. Hisashi settled in, staying near Izuku, while Shota sat at the kitchen table with an entire pot of coffee and a stack of paperwork and his computer. When Izuku's alarm on his phone went off at 5 in the morning and he began stirring, Hisashi was quick to silence it. Izuku sat up anyway, rubbing his eyes and then pulling his fingers through his tangled hair. "What do you think you're doing?" Shota said, a distinct lack of amusement in his voice for Izuku's dedication. He knew the kid's work studies began today, but he also knew that he was in no state to be going anywhere. "Night-eye," was Izuku's soft response. Hisashi laid a hand flat against Izuku's back. "I don't think that's a good idea, little listener." Izuku looked up at his guardian, something sparking in his eyes. "He's not holding me back anymore." Shota frowned, sensing something else going on, sensing that there was more behind that use of he. Shota got up from the table and went over to Izuku, sitting down next to him. "Who is he, kid?" Izuku went still, looking down at his gloved hands, picking at the nail beds of the fingers that weren't covered. After a second of thinking, he sighed. I dreamed about my father. It was... Izuku went silent again, his eyes hidden by his hair. Shota awkwardly patted the fluffy green hair, and then Izuku abruptly stood, scrubbing his face with his gloves and then straightening, squaring his shoulders. I'm going to my work studies, and I'm going to be fucking amazing and prove that stupid fanboy wrong. Hizashi's face softened, and he approached Izuku, laying a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you sure, Izuku? That nightmare seemed really bad. Izuku looked up, eyes narrowed with perseverance. I'm sure. Shota sighed heavily, and then nodded, giving in. All right. Better get ready then. Izuku nodded, and then practically fell forward, into Shota, wrapping his arms around his middle and squeezing. Shota blinked, arms raised as if he didn't know what to do with them. He'd hug the kid, sure, but usually to help him with a panic attack or while carrying him. He couldn't remember being hugged or hugging him like this, just simply for the hug itself. In front of him, Hizashi had his phone up and was snapping a picture soundlessly, grinning widely. Shota glared at him before reaching down and patting Izuku's back awkwardly. His students never hugged him, so forgive him for not knowing quite what to do. But Izuku was more than just a student by now. They'd ultimately adopted the boy. For all rights and purposes, he was their son, at least on paper. The thought had hit him before. He and Hizashi had even spoken on the subject, but it still took him by surprise every time. Thank you for being there, Izuku murmured, pulling back and wiping his eyes. You can always count on us, Izuku, Shota whispered back. Izuku blinked up at him, breath stuttering in his chest, before he nodded and then turned, jumping forward to hug Hizashi as well. Shota's loud husband squealed in excitement, and then wrapped his arms around the boy, uncaring about the height difference. Shota would deny taking out his phone for a picture, though Hizashi saw him, and the smile very nearly split his face in half. Today we'll be doing patrols and surveillance. Izuku stood between Togeda and Night Eye's sidekick, Bubble Girl, all in their hero costumes, while Night Eye gave them a briefing for the day. We'll split up into 2 groups, Mirio and Midoriya, Bubble Girl and me. Izuku frowned, glancing down at the papers scattered across Night Eye's desk. Surveillance, he muttered. Bubble Girl turned to Izuku, the mask covering her face, reflecting the harsh light in the room. Night Eye Agency is currently working on a secret investigation. Shie Hisaikai is a small designated villain group, Night Eye explained, turning a manila folder around to show to the 3 of them. Izuku saw several handwritten and typed notes, as well as a picture paper-clipped to the page of a pale man with short, shaggy brown hair. The most noticeable thing about the man, though, was the red and gold-tipped plague doctor mask that covered the lower portion of his face. Its young head, in other words, the number 2, Chisaki, has started showing strange actions. Night Eye went on while Izuku tried to read over the notes as quickly as possible. We've noticed him gathering more villains, Bubble Girl said, taking the picture from the paperclip to examine it. Recently, he's even made contact with the League of Villains. A shudder ran down Izuku's spine at the mention of the League, and his hand instinctively went to his throat. Night Eye caught the movement, and he narrowed his eyes at Izuku before speaking again. But we haven't been able to get any proof that he's planning anything criminal. Because of that, the Hisaikai is a gray close to black, and we cannot treat them like villains. Night Eye took the picture of Chisaki, checking it over. What we're after is their tail. Be careful not to let them suspect anything. Izuku nodded, speaking along with the other 2 when they said, Yes, sir. Less than an hour later had Izuku and Togeda walking along the sidewalk in the city. Izuku had his hood up, his hair braided and hidden, and his face shadowed, his arms swinging at his sides. Togeda walked proudly at his side, grinning and strong, a whole head taller than Izuku. Glancing up at him, Izuku couldn't help but think he would have made a great holder of One for All. "Oh, heroes!" a voice exclaimed, and Izuku frowned, looking away from Togeda and toward the sound. Someone was pointing at them. "It's the boy who won the UA Sports Festival!" Izuku grimaced, sweat collecting on his palms. He'd never done well with attention. He'd learned long ago to question any and all positive attention he received, unless he thoroughly trusted that person. "You all right?" Togeda looked down at him, one eyebrow raised. He must have noticed Izuku's tense posture. "Just a bit anxious," Izuku breathed, keeping the girl that had spoken in his peripheral, until she was completely out of sight as they walked. "You must have gone on patrol at least once during your internship, right?" Togeda asked. "Or was the League of Villains attack too traumatic?" Izuku winced again, resisting the urge to touch his scar. He needed to get over this lingering fear already. "No," Izuku answered, shaking his head. "But for various reasons, I wasn't able to experience the basics." His mind flashed back to his fight with Stain, and he shuddered, remembering the fear and desperation to save his friend's life, thinking that he'd been too late. The feeling of death and blood in his mindscape. His stomach churned just at the memory, and he was suddenly glad he hadn't eaten much that morning. "Really?" Togeda glanced at Izuku with raised brows before looking back in front of him as he walked. "That's strange. Don't worry, though. Sir and Bubble Girl are the ones actually watching the target today. We're just on patrol." Togeda suddenly jumped in front of Izuku and he stiffened, stopping mid-step. "Now that I think about it, we haven't told each other our hero names, huh?" he said, and Izuku relaxed slightly. Togeda bent sideways so that he could better see Izuku's face. It made him feel even shorter. "I guess we haven't," he answered, clearing his throat. "Mine is Nova." "I'm Lemillion." Togeda straightened with a grin, hands on his hips. "I don't have to save everyone, just 1,000,000. That's what I want to do, so that's why I chose Lemillion. Once we put on our costumes and go into the streets, we're heroes. Don't let your guard down, Nova." Izuku nodded his head in response, and Togeda smiled at him before continuing on. Izuku did not follow, instead stiffening, when he felt a presence rapidly moving toward him. He turned his head just in time to catch a sight of a flash of white as something slammed into his legs, bouncing off of him and hitting the ground. Izuku immediately crouched, eyes widening beneath his hood as he noticed a young girl, no older than 4 or 5, absolutely covered in bandages, aura radiating fear. He'd never seen an aura so blindingly white, just as white as her long hair. "Hey, hey," he said softly, reaching out with shaking hands. She flinched. Izuku's eyes narrowed into slits and he withdrew his hand, trying to calm his racing heart. There was another aura approaching, and this one was fucking menacing and angry as hell. He cast his eyes behind her, into the dark alleyway she had come running from. "Now, you know," a voice said, a man slowly walking into the light of day. A pale man, wearing a red and gold plague mask, the same guy from the picture Night Eye had shown them. "You can't go around causing trouble for the heroes." He stopped at the end of the alley, looking down at the two of them. Togeda had caught on and returned to stand beside Izuku's crouched form. "I'm sorry about my daughter, Hero," the pale man said. The girl scooted closer to Izuku, bright flashes spearing through her aura. Panic, terror. Izuku was not okay. and neither was this girl. She likes to play around a lot and keeps getting hurt. The man smiled behind his mask, eyes crinkling. I don't know what to do with her. Izuku wrapped an arm protectively around the girl, a snarl forming across his face. Fuck this guy. Fuck this situation. Fuck this. We're sorry, too, for bumping into her, Tokuda said, smiling. Izuku turned to look up at him, scowling. The words, "Be careful not to let them suspect anything," echoing between his ears in Night Eye's voice. Fuck that. Tokuda was talking, but Izuku tuned it out, looking down at the little girl's vivid, fear-filled red eyes. She had leaned forward and was clutching at Izuku's costume, as if it was a life raft and she was drowning at sea. One horn decorated her forehead, over her right eye. Long white hair. She wore what looked like a hospital gown, and bandages covered the entire length of her arms and legs. Izuku looked up when Tokuda suddenly took a step away, gesturing for Izuku to follow him. He'd obviously been trying to play ignorant, wanting to not raise the pale man's suspicions. Fuck that. Izuku moved to stand, and the girl's grip tightened, almost painfully against Izuku's shoulder. Izuku glanced down, mouth going dry when he saw tears. Her entire body shaking. Don't go, she choked out through withheld sobs. Time seemed to stop. The world held on the edge of a turning coin. It could fall in either direction. Izuku could grab the girl and run. He could push the girl toward Tokuda and attack Chisaki in broad daylight, surrounded by civilians. He could lure the man down the alley and fight away from the danger of potentially harming others. One option that did not exist, though, was abandoning this child. Let's go. Time resumed as Tokuda tried to persuade Izuku to move, as his heart beat a staccato rhythm against his ribcage. No. Izuku lifted his head, meeting serpentine golden eyes. He glared, anger rolling from his body in waves as the girl pressed her face into Izuku's chest. He was remembering his nightmare last night, the suffering he still endured, even years after his father had disappeared. No, he was not leaving this girl. What exactly are you doing to this girl? He hissed at the pale man, practically spitting the words out in accusation. Chisaki sighed and then lifted his hands in an "I give up" gesture. Geez, heroes are so sensitive to the subtle signs in people, huh? Very well. It's embarrassing to talk about it. People are watching here. So will you come this way with me? Deeper into the dank alley? Absolutely, Izuku would, so that he could rip this guy another asshole away from the prying eyes of the public, or melt him in his mindscape, or Detroit punch him into a wall, or rip his arms off, or smash his kneecaps in, or... Izuku stood, picking the girl up and cradling her against his chest. She was light, barely weighing anything at all. Too light. She kept her face pressed into his chest, her entire body shaking. It's all right, he murmured, so low that only she would be able to hear. I've got you. It's going to be okay. My name's Nova, and I'm going to rescue you, no matter what. Izuku glanced over at Tokuda as they began following the pale man down the alley, his green eyes resolute. He was not letting this drop. Chisaki would have to go through Izuku to get to this girl. Actually, recently I've had a lot of problems with Eri, the man said with a drawn-out sigh as they walked. She keeps defying me, no matter what I say. Izuku resisted both the urge to snort derisively and drop-kick the man in the spine. Parenting, huh? Must be hard, Tokuda said. Izuku glanced up at him, pure rage making him want to throat-punch Tokuda for saying something so idiotic, He wanted to scream. It's abuse. It's fucking abuse. I know the signs. But he didn't scream, no matter how much he wanted to. A child's life was on the line. Yes, children are hard to understand. Izuku's eyes narrowed as he noticed the man reaching with one hand to his other, removing his glove. Immediately, Izuku's thoughts went to a quirk like his own, requiring 5 points of contact, or 4, in the case of his right hand. The girl, Eri, wriggled in Izuku's grip, but he only tightened his hold. Izuku hadn't thought she could seem any more terrified, but he was wrong. As soon as she'd seen the movement of his hand, her aura had shined like a star in fear. Izuku was not letting go. He would carry her for as long as it took. They continued walking, Izuku whispering gentle, calm reassurances as they moved. The man's gloves were off, and Izuku didn't know what to do about it. I will carry you. It's okay. It's all right, he murmured. Just keep holding on. I've got you. They reached a small clearing between several buildings, and Chisaki turned to them. Eri, come. Her aura sparked, and Izuku tightened his grip. And then everything happened so fast. Izuku turned slightly to gauge Tokuda's reaction to what was going on, and the man moved. He flashed forward, too quick for Izuku to respond without hurting Eri in the process. His head turned to the side as if in slow motion, his eyes widening at the sight of a hand stretching toward his face. Izuku flinched back, but he was too slow, and the hand connected. The pain of every single atom being ripped apart, of his life unraveling. Nothing. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 2 of State of Mind. The second half of this chapter will be up next, which will pick up right where this leaves off. I would love to hear your theories if this is your first time listening to or engaging with this fanfic. If you have some ideas of what you think is going to happen next. Or you can also just drop reactions that you had to this part of the chapter so far. Some of the Danzawa moments and the parental moments taking place. Some of that hurt, comfort, the nightmare that Izuku experienced, and how that's becoming a source of motivation for him now. So drop those comments below with your thoughts, reactions, or anything else you'd love to share. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.